At my sister's wedding reception, my parents raised their glasses and said, "To the daughter we're truly proud of." I didn't cry, not this time. I just smiled, knowing one day they'd brag about me too. Except then, I won't be there to hear it. Some lessons burn best in silence. I remember the way the sunlight hit the hall that day, sneaking through the tall, arched windows and scattering across the polished wooden floors like tiny shards of gold. The air was warm, scented with roses and something faintly metallic, probably the polish on the banisters, but I like to think it was something more poetic, like the lingering memories of weddings past. I had arrived early as usual. There was a peculiar kind of solace in being early, watching life happen before everyone else arrived, as if the world was quietly confessing its secrets to me alone. My sister, radiant in a gown that looked spun from moonlight and silk, was laughing with her bridesmaids, their voices a soft chorus of joy. I should have been happy for her. I was. But happiness, I've learned, has a way of being complicated. Quick! Hit like, share with your friends, and subscribe. This story is about to get intense. I stood near the edge of the reception hall, leaning slightly against a velvet lined banquette, and watched my parents circulate among the guests, their faces carefully curated for maximum charm. My father had that familiar, practiced smile that could light up a room, but it didn't reach his eyes. My mother floated behind him, the perfect balance of elegance and warmth, but her eyes too betrayed a certain tension, a tightness that made me pause every time I caught it. I wondered if they even noticed me standing there, a quiet observer cloaked in shadows, or if I had become one of those invisible things in a room too loud with celebration. The music swelled as guests took their seats. A quartet had begun playing, the violins singing high notes that seemed to scrape at the ceiling before settling into the warmth of the hall. I could hear the gentle clinking of glasses as waiters circulated, carrying trays heavy with champagne flutes that caught the sunlight and fractured it into rainbows. It was a moment of pure staged magic, one of those things you see in movies, where every element is arranged to make you feel like you're part of something beautiful. But for me, it was always a little too sharp, a little too polished. I had grown used to watching the world from the periphery, always aware that the camera of reality never focused on me. And then it happened. The toast, my parents standing shoulder to shoulder, glasses raised, voices soft but confident. To the daughter we're truly proud of, they said. The words hung in the air, golden, heavy, almost tangible. The hall responded with polite applause, smiles, some tearful eyes glinting in the candlelight. I smiled too, carefully, measured, knowing that this time I would not cry. Not here, not now, not for my sister. I had learned long ago that some wounds are silent, that some victories are yours alone, even when the world celebrates someone else. But the smile I wore was different from the one I gave the world in passing. It was quiet, secret, tinged with a hope that one day the tables would turn, that I would be the one worthy of that same declaration of pride. I imagined the words being spoken for me, that the hall would hold its breath while my parents raised their glasses and truly meant it for me. Except in that vision, I wasn't there. It was a cruel kind of perfection, a future in which my triumph would exist beyond my reach, a story I could never witness firsthand. I held that thought close, letting it settle in my chest like a hidden ember. After the toast, I drifted toward the balcony that overlooked the garden. The night was falling, the sun surrendering its last rays to a velvet sky brushed with streaks of purple and orange. The garden lights flickered on, casting soft pools of gold across the manicured hedges. I leaned against the railing, inhaling the crisp evening air, letting the sounds of laughter and music drift upward like smoke. It was a moment of peace, a breath stolen from the performance inside. The reception continued without me, a parade of polite conversation and clinking glasses. I felt like an intruder, or maybe an observer in someone else's movie, always watching, but never participating fully. It was then that I noticed him, a man standing alone near the far edge of the garden, the shadows hiding half of his face, but his eyes catching the last slivers of light. He seemed almost spectral, a figure out of place in the brightness of celebration, and yet there was a magnetic quality to his presence, a tension that made my skin prickle. He wasn't looking at anyone else, didn't smile at passing guests, didn't engage with the noise. He simply existed, and in his quiet existence, he pulled something out of me I hadn't expected: curiosity mixed with unease. I had learned over the years that people like him were never as simple as they seemed. I found myself walking toward him, each step deliberate, careful. As I drew closer, he turned, just enough to reveal a hint of recognition. Or was it calculation? I froze for a heartbeat, studying the way he carried himself, the subtle tension in his shoulders, the quiet precision of his movements. Something about him felt familiar, though I couldn't place why, and yet even as I hesitated, a strange thrill surged through me. There's a peculiar sort of honesty in strangers who appear when you least expect them, in the liminal space between celebration and shadow. "You're not from around here," I said, my voice almost too soft, carried away slightly by the evening breeze. He tilted his head just a fraction, acknowledging me without fully committing to recognition. "Something like that," he replied, his tone careful, measured, but with an edge that hinted at stories untold. The conversation could have ended there, evaporated into polite dismissal, but instead it lingered, a thread that pulled both of us toward a moment neither of us could anticipate. "You don't mingle much," I said, gesturing vaguely to the glittering hall behind us. "You're missing the best part of the reception." He smiled faintly, and it was almost predatory, in that way that made you aware of your heartbeat. "I find the best stories are off stage," he said. There was a strange truth to that, a weight that made me shiver, even in the warmth of the evening. I wanted to ask more, to know why he was here, why he appeared in my peripheral vision, just as the night seemed to stretch toward something inevitable. But before I could, my sister's laughter carried across the garden, a sound both joyful and painful, and I remembered why I'd come to this place in the first place. The spell broke momentarily, and I turned back toward the light, toward the hall where glasses clinked and parents smiled in their carefully curated perfection. But when I looked back, he was gone, vanished into the shadows like he had never existed. And yet, I could still feel the faint trace of his presence, lingering in the cool night air like a whispered warning. Inside, the reception continued. My sister danced with her new husband, her dress swirling like liquid, moonlight around her. Guests cheered, friends took photos, and somewhere in the background, a string quartet played the kind of music that felt eternal, like it had always existed and always would. I watched from the edges, letting their joy wash over me while keeping my distance. The smile I wore remained quiet, measured, almost a mask, but inside, something stirred, a mixture of longing, anticipation, and a quiet defiance that refused to break. Later, as the night deepened and guests began to leave, I found myself back in the empty hall, the echoes of laughter fading into shadows. The glasses had been cleared away, the tables reset, and for a moment, the world felt suspended in a hushed, expectant silence. It was in that quiet that I noticed a folded piece of paper resting on the back of a chair. I picked it up, and my breath caught. The handwriting was familiar, impossibly precise, and yet I couldn't place it. The message inside was cryptic, almost like a riddle, hinting at secrets buried beneath layers of polite smiles and familial expectations. It read simply, "Some lessons burn best in silence, but not all of them are meant to wait." I read it twice, and a shiver ran down my spine. I knew, without knowing how I knew, that my life had just shifted in a way I couldn't yet understand. The night held its breath with me, the shadows leaning in, listening, and I realized that everything I had thought I knew about that night, about my family, about myself, was about to be rewritten. I didn't sleep that night. The paper I found on the chair had settled in my chest like a stone I couldn't move, heavy and cold. I held it loosely in my hand, tracing the letters with a fingertip, trying to convince myself it was just a joke, a misdelivered note, something meaningless. But deep down, I knew better. Some truths have a way of insisting on being acknowledged, no matter how quietly they whisper. I stayed in my room, lights off, listening to the faint hum of the city beyond the walls. Outside, the world moved with casual indifference. Cars passing, people talking, dogs barking. But inside, I felt a pulse, a rhythm that wasn't mine, yet somehow resonated with my own heartbeat. It was the echo of something imminent. By morning, the reception hall was just a memory, the echoes of laughter lingering like perfume. My sister had already left for her honeymoon, and the house felt emptier than it had in years. My parents moved through the rooms like ghosts performing familiar roles. My father arranging papers on his desk, my mother humming softly while straightening the living room cushions. They didn't mention the note, didn't ask if I'd seen it. They acted as though the night had been a flawless performance, as though everything had gone exactly according to plan. I wanted to ask questions, to confront them. But even in my own house, I felt a strange distance, a sense that some walls had been erected between us that I couldn't yet see, let alone climb. Days passed in the same surreal cadence. Life returned to its usual rhythms, but the paper haunted me, tucked away in a drawer I couldn't bring myself to open again. Every glance at it was a reminder that I was standing at the edge of something I didn't fully understand. And then the stranger appeared again, though I don't think he ever truly left. It started subtly, a shadow flickering at the edge of my vision, a feeling of being watched when I was alone. I began noticing him everywhere, though I couldn't say with certainty that it was him. But every time my eyes lingered, searching for familiarity, the sensation sharpened, a prickling along the back of my neck, as if someone were silently tracking my every move. One evening, I found myself walking down a narrow street near my apartment, just past sunset. The streetlights flickered to life, casting long, jittering shadows against the brick walls. I had no particular destination in mind, I never did, but the feeling of being followed nudged me forward with a quiet insistence. And there he was, standing beneath a street lamp, hands in pockets, head tilted slightly, watching. This time, there was no question. He had found me. "You shouldn't be reading that," he said as I approached, his voice calm, measured, yet carrying an edge that made me swallow hard. "It's not meant for your eyes. At least, not yet." I felt a flicker of fear, but it was mixed with something stronger. Curiosity. "Who are you?" I asked, keeping my voice steady even as my pulse spiked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he let the silence stretch, letting the streetlights flicker between us like a staccato heartbeat. Finally, he said, "Someone who knows more about your family than you do. Someone who's been waiting for you to notice." I stopped walking, my chest tightening, waiting for me to notice. What? What's happening? He took a step closer, and for a moment, I could see the faint glimmer of something beneath his eyes. Urgency, maybe desperation. "There are things your parents haven't told you, things they think you shouldn't know. But you will. Sooner or later, it was always going to be you." The words hit me like a cold wave. My parents? Secrets? I had suspected, of course. Everyone does in some way. But suspicion is a distant thing. It's comfortable, safe, and abstract. Reality, when it finally crashes in, is sharp, immediate, and leaves no room to breathe. "Why me?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Because you always notice. You always see the edges, the corners, the things left unspoken. That's why you're here, reading the note, feeling the weight of what others pretend isn't there." He paused, and I realized he wasn't just talking about that night. He was talking about years of observing, years of being the quiet witness to my life. "You're ready now, whether you know it or not." I wanted to argue, to refuse, to retreat into the safety of my apartment and pretend I hadn't just been thrust into something I couldn't understand. But the curiosity burned too brightly, and I felt my feet moving forward, drawn toward the man and the secrets he carried. We walked together through the city, past streets I'd known my entire life but now felt alien under the twilight. He led me to a building that had been abandoned for years, its windows boarded, the brickwork blackened with age and weather. The door creaked ominously as he pushed it open, and the smell of dust and mildew hit me immediately. But there was something else, something faint, almost metallic, that made the air electric. Inside, the room was empty save for a single table. and on it, a small stack of envelopes tied with a faded ribbon. Everything you need to understand, he said, gesturing toward them. But once you start, there's no going back. I hesitated. The paper from the reception, the shadows that followed me, the cryptic words, it all demanded an answer. I reached for the top envelope, the paper crackling softly beneath my fingers as I untied the ribbon. The first note was simple, almost innocuous, but the words it carried were anything but. They've lied to protect themselves, not you. What you think you know is only the surface. I read it twice, my stomach twisting. The message was vague, teasing, but I could feel the weight behind it. I wanted to scream, to demand clarity, but I knew the answers would come slowly, in pieces designed to unravel me, to test how much I could bear. The stranger watched silently, his expression unreadable. You'll see, he said finally, and there was a note of finality in his tone. And when you do, you'll understand why some lessons burn best in silence. Days stretched into nights, and my life began to fracture in subtle ways. My parents became unknowable to me, their smiles masking something darker, their casual remarks suddenly loaded with double meanings I had never noticed. Friends began noticing my distraction, my absent-minded stares, my tendency to disappear into rooms without explanation. But no one asked, and I did not volunteer. There is a strange power in silence, I realized. The way secrets can become a private language between you and the world, a language that isolates yet illuminates all at once. The envelopes became my obsession. Each one revealed fragments of a story, hints of betrayals, pieces of a puzzle that made my childhood seem both familiar and alien. One letter detailed a business deal my parents had kept secret. Another hinted at alliances with people I'd never met, people whose names I'd only overheard in passing. Every revelation was like a crack in the glass of the life I thought I knew, and every crack allowed more light to filter through. And then came the day I found the envelope that changed everything. I was in the attic, sifting through old boxes that smelled of dust and memory, when I noticed a thin, cream-colored envelope tucked behind a loose floorboard. No ribbon this time, no signature, just my name, written in the same precise hand I had come to recognize. My hands shook as I opened it, revealing a single photograph. It was taken years ago before I could even remember it happening. My parents stood at the edge of a garden, smiling for the camera, but behind them, partially hidden in the shadows, was a figure I recognized immediately. The man who had been appearing to me in the night, guiding me, warning me. And next to him, obscured but unmistakable, was a child. A child I knew I'd never met, a child whose existence my parents had never mentioned. The photograph didn't explain itself, didn't offer comfort. It simply existed, a fragment of a past they had hidden, a key to a truth I had not yet begun to comprehend. My pulse raced, my mind spiraled, and I felt the overwhelming certainty that everything I had believed about my life, about my family, was only the surface. Beneath it lay something darker, something that would change the very way I understood who I was, and who I was meant to become. The stranger's words echoed in my mind. Some lessons burn best in silence. And in that moment, I realized that the fire had already started. I didn't sleep again that night. The photograph sat on my desk like a small, accusing sun, illuminating corners of my mind I had never dared explore. Every time I looked at it, I felt the weight of eyes that had existed before I was aware of the world. My parents, smiling, unaware, or so it seemed, oblivious to the fact that their secrets were slowly erupting around me. And the child, that hidden child. My heartbeat thumped against my ribcage in a rhythm that was almost unbearable. Who were they? Why had my parents erased them from existence? And most importantly, what did it mean for me? I paced my apartment for hours, the walls closing in with each step. The stranger's presence lingered like a phantom. I could feel him in the corners of the room, just beyond sight, a silent observer guiding my descent into truths I had no choice but to confront. He had warned me that some lessons burn best in silence, but nothing had prepared me for the searing reality that the fire might not wait for me to be ready. The next morning, I made a decision. I had to confront my parents. I had to demand the answers their smiles had hidden for years. I wanted the truth, no matter how brutal it might be. When I arrived at the house, everything looked deceptively normal. My father was in the kitchen, sipping coffee, reading the morning news with the same calm detachment he always carried. My mother moved quietly, dusting the counter, humming a tune I didn't recognize. They glanced at me briefly, offering polite smiles, but the tension was palpable. I could feel it, the taut thread of unspoken knowledge that connected us. I need to ask you something, I said, my voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of urgency. Something important. They both turned to me fully then, smiles fading slightly, replaced by that familiar, practiced look of caution. My father set his cup down slowly, as though bracing himself for a storm he had long anticipated. What is it? He asked carefully, his tone neutral, but I could see the small tightening around his eyes, the hesitation. I held up the photograph. This. Who is this child? Why have I never heard of them? For a long moment, they didn't speak. The silence was suffocating, thick with the weight of years of concealment. And then my mother's lips parted, her voice a whisper that seemed to barely belong to this world. You weren't supposed to find that, she said. Not supposed to? I echoed, feeling a surge of anger and disbelief. They're your child. You erased their existence from my life. My father sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd only ever seen when he was truly defeated. It's complicated, he said finally, almost reluctantly. We wanted to protect you, and them. Some truths, they're dangerous. Dangerous? I repeated, incredulous. Dangerous to whom? To you, to me, or to the rest of my life? They exchanged a look, one that spoke of shared history, of burdens carried alone for years. My mother shook her head slowly. We made choices, she said quietly. Choices to keep our family safe. Sometimes that means hiding things, even from those we love most. I felt the room tilt slightly, the ground shifting beneath me. Safe? You erased someone? You hid a person's entire existence and you call that safe? My father's hand rested on my shoulder then, firm but gentle. It's not about what's right, it's about survival. You'll understand one day, or maybe not. Maybe it's a lesson some people can't bear. I pulled away sharply, the weight of betrayal pressing down. You've spent my entire life pretending, smiling, raising your glasses, telling everyone how proud you are, while hiding them. My mother's eyes glistened, but not with tears. There was something darker, something sharper, like guilt fused with fear. It wasn't supposed to be like this, Nai, she said. We didn't want you to find out like this. And then I realized something horrifying. They weren't just hiding a child. They were hiding something else, something much larger, something that had shaped every moment of my life without my knowing it. The envelopes, the notes, the stranger, they weren't random. They were all connected, threads in a web I hadn't yet begun to unravel. I need to know everything, I said, my voice cold but unyielding. Not just this photograph, everything, every secret, every hidden choice. My father leaned back in his chair, rubbing his forehead. You're ready for the truth, he admitted finally. But you may wish you weren't. Some things, once revealed, cannot be unseen. I felt my stomach drop, a hollow pit opening beneath my feet. I don't care. I'm done living in fragments. Tell me. And so they began. The story spilled out slowly, like water carving through rock. My parents had not just hidden a child. They had hidden a series of decisions, alliances, and betrayals that stretched back years, decades even. The child in the photograph was not just a sibling. They were a key, a linchpin in a network I could barely comprehend. They had been removed from our lives to protect us all from a man whose influence stretched into places no one dared speak of, a man who had been part of our family's past, present, and perhaps future. The stranger, the one who had been appearing to me, was connected. He had been watching, guiding, warning me, because the time had come for the balance to shift. For years, he had been waiting for the right moment for me to learn the truth, to take the next step. And now with the photograph, with the envelopes, with the weight of everything pressing down, the moment had arrived. I sat back, my mind reeling. Everything I had believed about my parents, about their pride, about my own place in the family, was false. And yet, beneath the anger, beneath the shock, there was something else, a strange, combustible clarity. I understood, in a way I had never understood before, that life was not about perfection. It was about survival. It was about choosing what truths to protect and which fires to let burn. Days turned into weeks as I pieced together the fragments of our family's history. I retraced the stranger's steps, followed leads hidden in the envelopes, uncovered people my parents had erased from memory. Every revelation was more astonishing than the last. I learned of betrayals so deep they reshaped entire landscapes of trust, of alliances with people who would have killed for advantage, of sacrifices so profound they left scars invisible to the naked eye. And through it all, the stranger was there, always present, always just beyond sight. Sometimes I felt him in the corner of my apartment, sometimes across the street as I traced the steps of my parents' past. He never spoke unnecessarily, but when he did, the words carried a weight that bent reality slightly, altered perception, forced me to see things I would have preferred remained hidden. One night, as the city slept under a blanket of fog and distant sirens, he finally spoke. "You're close now," he said, his voice barely audible over the wind. "The last piece is waiting. But be careful. The truth. It will not be kind." I followed him, though fear twisted my stomach. We walked through alleys slick with rain, through buildings abandoned and crumbling, through corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly. And then finally, we arrived at a place I had never seen, a hidden room behind a bookstore, accessible only through a narrow staircase descending into the dark. Inside, the walls were lined with photographs, documents, and artifacts of a life I had never imagined. Every envelope I had found, every note, every shadow, every whispered warning, it all converged here. And in the center of the room, illuminated by a single bare bulb, was a large wooden chest. The stranger looked at me, eyes serious. "Inside is everything. The truth your parents tried to hide, the life they erased, the secrets they thought would remain buried. But once you open it, there's no turning back." I took a deep breath and lifted the lid. Inside were files, photographs, journals, letters, all detailing the life of the child in the photograph. And as I read, I realized something unbearable. The child was not just hidden. They had been living under constant surveillance, protected from a threat I had yet to comprehend. My parents' pride, their careful orchestration of appearances, their silences, it had all been to ensure this child's safety. But then came the final revelation, a letter addressed to me, written in the same precise hand as all the others. I unfolded it slowly, my hands trembling. "If you are reading this, it means the time has come. You are not just a witness. You are part of the story. Everything you have seen, everything you have uncovered, has led you here. The choices you make now will shape the rest of our lives. Remember, some lessons burn best in silence, but not all of them are meant to wait." And then, the truth hit me like a hammer. The stranger, the hidden child, my parents' secrets, they were all interconnected. More than that, my own existence was entangled in a web of decisions I hadn't known I was part of, choices I hadn't made but would now have to face. I looked up at the stranger. "Why me?" I whispered again, though now I understood the depth of the answer. I wasn't just a witness. I was the key. I had always been the key. And then the final twist revealed itself, not through words, but through realization. My parents had not only hidden the child, they had hidden me from myself. My life, my identity, my place in the family had been shaped by a silent lesson I was only now learning. The fire they warned about had already begun, and I was standing at its center. The night after I uncovered the chest, I couldn't sleep. The weight of the secrets, the enormity of the truth, pressed against my skull like a vice. My apartment felt smaller somehow, claustrophobic, as if the walls themselves were aware of the fire igniting inside me. I replayed the stranger's words over and over, their cadence etched into my mind. Some lessons burn best in silence, but not all of them are meant to wait. That note had become a prophecy, and I understood now that the fire was no metaphor. It was real, and it was mine. I returned to the hidden room the following day, unable to resist the pull. The stranger was already there, waiting, his silhouette stark against the dim light. He didn't smile, didn't greet me, he just gestured toward the chest. You've read what's inside. You know the stakes. But the truth is bigger than even those files. There's one last piece, the one your parents never wanted you to see. My hands shook as I reached for a folder on the very top. Unlike the other documents, this one was unsealed, its edges frayed as though it had been handled countless times waiting for me. The first page was a photograph. My parents, standing in a dimly lit room, holding hands with someone I did not recognize. Their smiles were strained, forced, but the eyes carried a mixture of fear and reverence, an emotion I had never seen in them before. And then I saw the child, not a photograph of the past this time, but a recent image. Older, sharper, watching, almost glaring at the camera, their expression unreadable. But it wasn't the eyes that cut me open. It was the recognition. They weren't just related to me, they were me. The realization struck like a physical blow. My hands dropped the photograph and I stumbled back. I I don't understand, I stammered, my chest tightening. This this is me? The stranger's voice was soft, almost patient. Not the you who believes they know everything. The you who exists because your parents had to hide parts of the truth. You were separated from yourself for protection. I stared at him, confusion and fear tangled together. Separated? From myself? What do you mean? You are not the child your parents raised in public, he explained. You are the child who was hidden from them and from yourself. Everything they told you, everything they celebrated, it was a mask, a layer meant to protect the part of you that needed to survive. You've been living in fragments because the whole could have destroyed you. The words spun in my mind, refusing to settle into clarity. I thought of the reception, the toast, the way I had smiled while my parents raised their glasses for my sister. The pride they had expressed, it had never been meant for the person I believed myself to be. It had been meant for a version of me that existed only in shadow, that had been hidden, protected, and severed from the life I thought was mine. I sank to the floor, my back against the wall. The room seemed to shrink further, the documents, photographs, and notes pressing in on me, whispering secrets that had no right to exist in my consciousness. Why? I asked finally, my voice broken. Why would they do this? Why hide me from myself? The stranger knelt beside me, eyes level with mine. Because you were the target, he said quietly. Not just you, but what you could become. There are forces, people, who would have destroyed you if they had known who you truly were. Your parents made choices no one else could understand. They erased, concealed, and protected. And now the time has come for you to reclaim yourself. Reclaim. The word reverberated in my chest. Reclaim. It implied ownership, power, responsibility. And yet, it also carried a terrifying weight. If I reclaimed myself, I would no longer be the person I had believed I was. I would be someone entirely new, and I didn't know if I was ready for that. The stranger extended his hand, silent encouragement for me to stand. I rose slowly, the weight of revelation settling into my bones. There's a meeting tonight, he said. With them, with everyone involved. You need to be there. You need to see what they see, understand what they know, and finally decide what your life will be. I didn't ask questions. There was no time, no room for hesitation. I had been chasing fragments of truth for weeks, and now the mosaic was almost complete. I followed him into the night, through streets I thought I knew, but which now seemed alien, shadows bending strangely under the streetlights. My mind raced with possibilities, with fears, with a growing awareness that the life I had taken for granted was no longer mine to inhabit. The meeting was held in a building that seemed abandoned at first glance, a warehouse on the edge of the city, walls scarred by years of weather and neglect. Inside, the space was transformed into something both ceremonial and menacing. Long tables covered in black cloth, photographs pinned to walls, documents stacked neatly in piles, and a single chair at the far end, positioned under a harsh spotlight. The air smelled faintly of ozone and candle wax, an odd mixture that set my nerves on edge. And then I saw them. Not my parents. Not exactly. A group of figures, all connected to the hidden truths, all exuding an aura of authority and danger. Some were familiar. Names and faces I had encountered in the envelopes, in the documents, in whispered mentions. Others were unknown, their identities concealed beneath shadows and masks, and in the chair under the light sat the child. Me, or the version of me that had been hidden, protected, separated. I froze. The room seemed to hum, every breath, every movement amplified in my ears. My parents stood behind me, watching my reaction, their expressions a mix of pride, fear, and resignation. I wanted to speak, to scream, to demand answers, but no sound came. The stranger stepped beside me, a silent anchor in a storm of revelation. "Do you understand now?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "The person they celebrated, the daughter they raised in public, that was never the whole story. You were always more than that, and tonight you will finally meet yourself." The words hung in the air, heavy, almost suffocating, and then the child under the light rose, and my world shifted entirely. The eyes staring back at me were mine, but older, sharper, carrying a weight of experiences I had never lived. The voice, when it spoke, was both familiar and alien. "I've been waiting for you." My knees buckled, and I sat on the floor, stunned, as the realization solidified. All this time, the child had been alive, existing in secret, growing into a version of me that my parents had protected from the world and from myself. Every envelope, every shadow, every cryptic note had led me here, to this confrontation, to this impossible meeting of self and self. "You're me," I whispered, disbelief and awe mingling in my voice. "All this, it's been you, living while I thought I was alone." "Not alone," the hidden version replied softly. "Protected, hidden, waiting for the right moment. And that moment is now. Everything your parents did, every secret, every choice, they were all to keep me safe until you could see me, until you could handle the truth without being destroyed by it." Tears blurred my vision. The anger, the confusion, the fear, they all collided, and yet beneath them, a strange relief began to settle. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't losing my mind. The hidden child, the other me, was real, alive, and right in front of me. The stranger stepped back, allowing the reunion, the confrontation, the reckoning to unfold without interference. "This is the moment," he said quietly. "The final piece. The moment when your life, your truth, and your family's choices converge. Be careful, be deliberate, and above all, choose wisely." I rose slowly, facing the hidden version of myself. The room seemed impossibly still, the air charged with anticipation. My parents watched, expressions unreadable, yet I could feel the love, the fear, the sacrifice in their gaze. And then finally I spoke. "All these years, you've been living the life I was supposed to have. Protected, hidden, everything my parents feared would destroy me. You survived it. And now, we meet. But what happens next? How do we exist together?" The hidden me smiled faintly, a mix of sadness and recognition. "We are not separate. We are pieces of the same whole. And now we must reconcile, or risk losing everything. There's a choice, but it's not simple. One of us can live freely in the world you know, but the other must remain in the shadows, the protector. That's the balance your parents created, and it's the balance we must honor, or break entirely." I felt the fire in my chest ignite fully then, the culmination of every secret, every hidden note, every lesson in silence. I understood the stakes, the sacrifices, the legacy of protection and survival my parents had built. And I knew that whichever choice I made, nothing would ever be the same again. The room felt impossibly still, as though time itself had paused, holding its breath while I faced the other version of myself. Everything I had believed about family, identity, and truth was shattered. Every secret, every hidden choice, every silent lesson converged in this moment, pressing down on me like a storm that could either cleanse or destroy. I stepped closer, my heartbeat hammering against my ribs. I could see it in their eyes, the mirror of my own fears, my own regrets, my own unspoken desires. The hidden me, the child my parents had kept alive in shadows, was no longer a mystery. They were alive and they were real. But the words they had spoken, the choice I now faced, were heavier than anything I had ever imagined. "You understand now," they said, their voice steady, unwavering, though a tremor of emotion lingered beneath the surface. "We cannot both exist fully in the same world. One of us must remain hidden, the protector, the shadow. The other, the world must see. But that choice, the balance, it is yours." I felt the weight of every year, every secret, every hidden truth pressing down on me. The fire my parents had warned about was blazing now, consuming assumptions, memories, and carefully constructed facades. I realized in that moment that my life had never truly been mine. It had been curated, protected, segmented, so that the most dangerous truths could survive. And now, survival demanded a choice. The stranger, silent until now, stepped back and observed. His presence was calm, almost ceremonial, a reminder that while the stakes were immense, the rules of this hidden world were absolute. "The decision is yours," he said softly. "But remember, the path you choose will define not only your life, but the lives of everyone tied to these secrets. There is no undoing it." I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath. The hidden me watched, expression unreadable, waiting, patient. And then I understood the paradox. It wasn't a question of which life I wanted. It was a question of which I could endure. Could I continue in the world I had known, a life built on fragments, half-truths, and careful facades? Or would I embrace the shadow, the hidden legacy, the life my parents had meticulously preserved, knowing I might never fully return to the world I thought I owned? I stepped closer, hands trembling, heart raw with fear and clarity. "And if I choose to merge?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "If I refuse to separate the light from the shadow, can we coexist?" The hidden me tilted their head, a shadow of a smile appearing on their lips. "It is a risk," they said, "a dangerous one. The balance your parents created will resist it. But perhaps there is a way. But only if you are willing to face every consequence, every hidden truth, every fire that has burned silently all these years." I nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of what I was about to do. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was reconciliation. It was claiming everything that had been stolen from me, not just the years, not just the identity, but the entire spectrum of myself, light and shadow alike. We stood facing each other, two halves of the same soul, both aware that the world outside the warehouse would never understand what had transpired here. My parents were silent now, the pride and fear in their eyes blending into something fragile, human. They had built their lives on the notion that one child could exist safely in the light while the other lingered in shadow. But I was refusing their caution. I would reclaim myself entirely, even if it meant facing the fires they had tried to protect me from. I reached forward and our hands met. The connection was electric, a jolt that reverberated through every memory, every suppressed feeling. The hidden me exhaled, a sound that was mine, yet not mine, as though centuries of silence were dissolving in a single breath. And then slowly, impossibly, we merged, our identities intertwining, memories flooding both directions, feelings once hidden, surfacing in a tidal wave of understanding. The room shimmered, or maybe it was just my perception. I could feel every secret my parents had carried, every decision, every sacrifice, every burden, merging with my own consciousness. I was myself, finally fully, and yet expanded, reshaped, irrevocably altered. The hidden me was no longer hidden. The fragments were whole, and the fire that had always burned in silence now blazed openly, illuminating every corner of my life I had been blind to. My parents watched, stunned, their carefully constructed facade cracking. My father stepped forward, voice quivering. You, you survived it, he said. You made it whole. Against all odds, you became yourself. My mother's tears glistened in the dim light. I didn't think anyone could, she admitted, her voice fragile. Not after everything, not after the choices we made, but you've done what we never could. I didn't answer. Words felt unnecessary. I was standing in the aftermath of everything: secrets, lies, love, protection, and survival. I was whole, yet changed forever. The fire had burned, yes, but it hadn't destroyed me. It had forged me, reshaped me, and finally allowed me to understand the truth behind every silent lesson my parents had tried to teach without words. The stranger finally spoke again, his tone soft, almost approving. It's done, he said. The balance has shifted. The fire is no longer silent. And now, you exist fully. All that remains is what you choose to do with it. I looked around the warehouse at the photographs, the documents, the remnants of the lives that had been hidden from me, and I realized something profound. The story wasn't over. I was not just a survivor, I was the architect of my future. Every choice, every step, every action from this point forward would carry the weight of everything I had uncovered, everything I had reclaimed. And then, as I stepped into the light, leaving shadows behind but carrying them within, I understood the final truth. Identity is not given, it is claimed. It is forged in fire and silence, in love and betrayal, in courage and fear. It is ours to reclaim, or it is lost forever. I walked out of the warehouse into the night, the city sprawling endlessly before me. The world felt larger, brighter, yet infinitely more complex. I had faced the hidden parts of myself, reclaimed the fragments that had been kept in shadows, and survived. But I also knew that some of the lessons my parents had tried to protect me from, the dangerous, painful, beautiful ones, would continue to shape me in ways I could not yet predict. And that was the paradox of life. Survival was only the beginning. As I stepped forward, I began to reflect, not just on my own journey, but on the truths we all carry, the secrets we hide, the fragments of ourselves we fear to confront. And I found myself asking questions that I could not answer alone. Questions I hoped others might grapple with in the silence that follows a story like mine. How much of ourselves are we willing to hide to protect those we love, or to protect ourselves? When the truth is dangerous, what does it mean to survive it fully? Are the fragments of our identities, the pieces we suppress, the parts we fear, meant to be revealed, reclaimed, or left in shadow? And finally, if the fire of truth burns too brightly, are we brave enough to step into it, to merge all the pieces of ourselves, and face what we were always meant to become? The city stretched before me, endless, uncertain, alive with possibilities. And for the first time, I knew that no matter what came next, I was whole. I was myself, completely, irrevocably, and impossibly. And that I realized was the ultimate revelation.